Thank you all for joining NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast featuring our neuropsychologists, Dr. Laura Jansons and Dr. Skip Hrin. They've been practicing for well over 50 years and are happy to share their knowledge with you. You can find Dr. Laura at jansons.com, that's JANSONS.com, and Dr. Skip can be found at drskiphrin.com, that's drskip, My name is Pete, and today we're going to go chat with Dr. Richard Gevirtz, who is a professor of psychology, distinguished professor of psychology at the California School of Professional Psychology in San Diego, and that's at Alliant International University. Say that 3 times fast. He's also a trainer and an HRV trainer with the Stens Corporation. If you remember, we recently had Steve Stern, the owner over at Stens Corporation, and he suggested that we get Dr. Gevirtz on, and here we are today. Doctor, thank you so much for coming on board with us today.
My pleasure.
Okay, really simple question, softball to kick it off, Doctor. What is HRV? What does it stand for?
So HRV stands for heart rate variability. And it's a little bit not intuitive, but because most people are used to heart rate, like that you get in the average of the gym, but those are averaged values that just look at your average heart rate. If you look at heart rate beat by beat by beat, turns out healthy heart rates have quite a lot of variability between beats. So you have one beat, then another, a little shorter, a little longer, and that's actually a healthy sign. So over many years, the measurement of heart rate variability has developed because those changes in beat-to-beat heart rate are a pretty good indicator of what's going on in the autonomic nervous system, especially the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. So there's been tens of thousands of studies measuring heart rate variability. And then about 20 years ago, Dr. Paul Lehrer and myself developed a biofeedback technique where we actually feed the information back to patients about the changes in heart rate variability as a kind of a therapeutic intervention. And that has turned out to be very successful and has taken off. And so there's now it's pretty widespread.
When did you meet Steve Stern at Stens? Say that 3 times fast. How did you start doing training for him? How did he find you, Doctor?
Well, Steve has been a member of our national biofeedback group for many, many years, probably going back 25 years. So he's always exhibited, Stens has always exhibited at our meetings, and I've used their equipment and know all of the staff there for many years. And then, I don't know, about 20 years ago, or maybe a little bit less, he said, would you like to do a training? I don't have a lot of time for those external trainings because I'm a full-time professor, but I said, yeah, I would enjoy doing an occasional 2-day workshop for you because those workshops are nice because he supplies equipment for all the participants. And I don't get to do that very often where the participants actually can work. So I think for about 15 years, maybe, I've been doing 1 or 2 workshops for him a year all over the country, including in Chicago, where I'm from. So it was always nice to go back to Chicago and see my family as a part of it.
You're from Chicago, did not know that.
Yeah, not
City
far.
proper or the burbs?
The burbs, the North Burbs, although I'm a Sox fan.
Which North Burb, Doc?
Skokie, Evanston.
Skokie, Evanston, okay, got it, all right. That makes sense, you're a Sox fan. When did you first learn about HRV? Prior to Steve? I mean, because you were studying psychology. How did that work out? How did you get involved to get started?
Yeah, that was an interesting story. So I was involved in the field of biofeedback very early on. I was living in Minnesota at the time. And at the time, this is now mid-1970s, the only real modalities available in biofeedback or neurofeedback were EMG, muscle, feeding back muscle activity, or finger temperature, or skin conductance, like a galvanic skin response. and was working a little bit clinically. I was teaching, but I was working clinically at Mayo Clinic on like a part-time basis. And I found those modalities a bit limiting. We weren't doing any, there were some neurofeedback at the time, but it was very cumbersome that we weren't doing that. And I came across literature. I knew some literature about heart rate, and there's a pioneer in the field called Steve Porges, who in 1990s published an article about the parasympathetic nervous system and how important that was in stress. And at just about that time, we began to develop equipment that could measure heart rate beat by beat by beat, because up till then it was only averages. So I began playing around with it as a possible biofeedback mode, really not having any idea what I was doing, but just feeding back information to people. And lo and behold, it really was a pretty powerful form of biofeedback, adding to the other modalities we had. So that was the beginning. At the time, my colleague Paul Lehrer out at Rutgers was also doing the same. And so he was working on asthma, I was working on anxiety and pain, and we started collaborating. And little by little, really due to the work of a Russian physiologist named Evgeny Vaschilo, we began to figure out what the heck we were doing and why it was powerful intervention. Vaschilo was the cosmonaut to the astronauts, to the cosmonauts. He was the physiologist for the cosmonauts, sorry. And so there's a great anecdote connected to this. He was monitoring heart rate, and they had pretty decent monitoring, one of the cosmonauts in space. And every day for about 20 minutes, one of these cosmonauts, Yuri, would have these crazy looking heart rate patterns. They thought it was space sickness or something terrible. And so Evgeny calls up and says, "Yuri, what are you doing?" And Yuri says, "Shut up, I'm meditating." So basically, Yuri had kind of discovered the same thing we teach with heart rate variability biofeedback, and produces a very dramatic changes in heart rate patterns, which turns out to be the key for why it works so well.
The heading that I'm going to put for this show, Doctor, is chronic pain, fibromyalgia, gastrointestinal pain, trauma. How does HRV help out with that, or what are the trainings that you do? Is it the vagal nerve? I'm the layman of the group, so I don't know. I'm asking a question for the people that are tuning in, how they can do this HRV training to help out with, just throwing out there, fibromyalgia. What do you have to do? How does it work? I know we only have a 40-minute show here, but
yeah. Well, let's start with actually gastrointestinal disorders. That's the clear-cut one.
Okay.
So that the one people would know is IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, is the most common. In kids, that's usually called functional abdominal pain. It's incredibly common in kids. Kids, especially in middle school, when things get a bit more stressful, they often come down with a lot of stomach pain, constipation, diarrhea, bloating. And so we have a clinic at our campus, and we see tons of those kids. Well, so the background behind that is that some of these disorders that you mentioned, we think have a very strong autonomic nervous system component to them. The autonomic nervous system is composed of two branches: the sympathetic, the fight, flight, fright branch, and the parasympathetic, which is the rest, digest, restore branch. The sympathetic, most people are familiar with, kind of the fight flight response. And for many years, we thought that was really the culprit in these disorders. But it turns out, based on work that Steve Porges and others have done, that the parasympathetic system, especially the 10th cranial nerve, the vagus nerve, is part of that parasympathetic system, which is called the vagal or the vagal brake, the vagus or the vagal brake, seems to play an important role in day-to-day regulation of all these functions in our body that are automatic, like digestion, like changing heart rate patterns, like respiration, many things in the body that are controlled automatically by the autonomic nervous system. And it appears that under long periods of stress or other kinds of perturbations, that this system can get out of balance or inflexible. And especially the gut is heavily regulated by the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic really only shuts it down when there's a true fight-flight response. And so what we've realized is that these kids are going through stressful periods during those middle school years especially, where something called vagal withdrawal occurs. So if you think of the accelerator as a sympathetic and the brake as the parasympathetic, the first thing that happens under any kind of threat, even mild threat like worry or social drama, is that the brake goes off. The vagal brake goes off. It makes sense from an evolutionary point of view. When you're under threat, you wouldn't want to have a brake on systems in your body. You don't need to be digesting your Big Mac if there's a saber-toothed tiger out there, right? So the brake goes off very quickly, and we call that vagal withdrawal. And we've done studies now where we hook kids up or adults up for 24-hour readings, and we can really see how often that brake goes off in them. And in the kids the one study we published with kids, that brake went off a lot in the kids who had symptoms compared to normal kids without symptoms. So we kind of reconstituted the idea of stress being something that turns on the fight-flight system to something that turns off the rest-digest system. And then it turns out that we have an intervention for that that's a brand new idea that's 2,500 years old, which is a breathing, a kind of modern version of a breathing yoga technique. Because it turns out when you breathe based on the biofeedback, you breathe at a very specific kind of frequency in an effortless way, you really turn on a powerful stimulus of that vagal brake. And it stimulates areas in the brain. The pathways from the heart to the brain are powerful. And it begins to regulate the gut as well. So these kids, when they practice this biofeedback technique, or adults, get really good symptom relief when they practice it on a regular basis. They do have to practice regularly. But that was sort of the basis of the logic behind the biofeedback.
Skip, what do you think?
Wow. Only 40 minutes, huh? That's what I was thinking. We got some questions here. I don't want to back us up too much, Dr. Gevirtz, but so you take your heart rate, everybody's got smartphones and you can say, hey, my resting heart, whatever, sitting here at 72. You're saying that's an average over time. Again, I'm thinking for newer listeners at home. So that's an average over whatever the time period might be, 30 seconds or something.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe five to 8 beats. It takes a better bit of instrumentation to get beat by beat. So you need something that'll detect the difference between each heartbeat.
All right, so I can't do the math that fast, but say one heartbeat's at 5 and 8, and you got these different intervals between them. How does that difference or the variability reflect health? How does this variability, because you want it, right? Instead of every 3 seconds it's beeping, what's so great about the variability?
Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive. Usually we think of variability as bad and things, but in this case, the variability is reflecting the autonomic nervous system's ability to adjust to both internal and external stimuli. Right. So if you think about it, it's like having a really good thermostat in a house that has a lot of drafts. Right. So if you had a house in the Chicago suburbs with poor insulation, and the usual wind was blowing through, so it gets cold and hot and cold and hot, and your thermostat has to turn on and off quickly, that would be a variable thermostat, right? If you were monitoring the thermostat, it would be going on and off. That would be good, right? Because that would be keeping the temperature as stable as it can.
Like adaptation.
Pardon me?
Adaptation. I was making sure I was on mute. Like your body adapts to the changes, and that's a positive thing.
Right. It's constantly adapting, and those changes are coming from internally inside the body. So your gut is demanding things, your brain is demanding things, your lungs are demanding things to make changes, as well as externally. So when you're an external threat, like a test in school, or somebody snubbing you and socially, it responds to those things as well by kind of making adjustments to anything that it needs to make adjustments to. So if it's making a lot of adjustments, it's quite variable and quite unregular. So counterintuitively, heart rates that look like they're all over the place are the healthy ones. Very metronome-like heart rates happen just before you die.
All right, I'll stop shooting for that then for a while.
And that's different from when we do neurofeedback. We take these QEEG photos, images, where the regulation is not good. Dysregulation is not healthy.
Right. Yeah, and other kinds of measures, like in your palm sweating, you wouldn't want a ton of variability in palm sweating, right? That would mean you're emotionally all over the place, or some other measures. But one of the reasons it's variable is that it's also controlling blood pressure. So there's a feedback loop in the body, like a thermostat in the body, that when your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes down. And when your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate, when blood pressure goes down, your heart rate goes up. Because variability in blood pressure is not good. Variability in heart rate is good, but in blood pressure is not good. And there's a system called the baroreflex, these sensors that sense when blood pressure is up or down, and they feed back to the heart and say, whoop, blood pressure's up, slow the heart down. Blood pressure's down, speed the heart up. And they try to stabilize resting blood pressure. We don't want blood pressure to be all over the place at rest. That's not healthy for the body. So the heart kind of does all the hard work to keep everything else going smoothly.
Okay, that certainly works for me. I have another question, and I don't know if we're jumping, too far to this. I would imagine there's other things to discuss along the way here, just on how this system works. But how, not to give away the shop, right? But how are you teaching these kids to do this? How long does it take, and can they take it home with them? And is it apparatus?
Yeah. So there's clinical training grade that we have in our clinics, but there's also home trainers. So what the feedback, the simplest feedback is, they just see their beat-to-beat heart rate on a graph. And what happens is when you breathe in, so happens there's a reflex in the brainstem that inhibits the vagus nerve during inhalation. So your brake is going off when you breathe in, and your brake is going on when you breathe out. If you think about it, it makes sense. You'd want your heart rate to be a little bit faster with a brake off when there's oxygen present in the alveoli. And then when you're breathing out, there's really no reason to have a fast heart rate. It's a waste. So it actually slows it down. It saves you something like 350 to 400 million heartbeats in a lifetime by having this healthy brake going on and off. And that rhythm is called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. It's a strange kind of a name for a healthy arrhythmia, RSA. So then that happens all the time, just during normal breathing. But it turns out that during specific kind of slow breathing techniques, the brake going on and off is really exaggerated a lot. That's what was happening to the cosmonaut. So instead of your heart rate going up when you breathe in from, let's say, 72 to 78, back down to 72, it goes from 68 to 82, back down to 68 with each breath cycle. Big swings. And we discovered this years and years ago by studying yogis and swamis during breath meditations. And it looked like something terrible was happening to them. Some of those yogis would have heart rates go from 50 to 90 and back down to 50 with each breath cycle. The cosmonaut had the same thing. He had been doing that for years, a young, healthy guy. So, and that rhythm is healthy, is small during normal breathing, but during slow breathing, it's exaggerated. So what we do for the biofeedback is we have people looking at a line of their heart rate on a screen and telling them to make the peaks and the valleys as big as they can make them. And we try to find the breathing rhythm that amplifies those peaks and valleys, big waves, as much as possible. And we call that resonance frequency, because it turns out there's a very specific frequency in everybody's body that maximizes those peaks and valleys. And it has to do with the relationship between the blood pressure rhythms and the breathing rhythms being in a certain sequence. And it's truly resonance like a bell ringing is resonant, or other kinds of things like that. And once they discover the specific frequency, it doesn't change once you're an adult. Then we send them home to practice either with just free pacers. There's a whole bunch of things online to pace. So let's say your resonance frequency is 6 per minute, 6 breaths a minute. That's what mine is. So every day I practice with some music, and I can give you. We have a free website. People can download this music. I can give it to you to put on your thing if you want. And so listening to music or just in my own mind, practicing exactly at that pace. When that happens, my heart rate goes up and down much greater extent than it would ordinarily. And it turns out that when you do that, it has very powerful effects on the reflexes in the body, but also on the pathways up into the brain. So the pathways from the heart to the brain are actually quite a bit more powerful than from the brain to the heart. We call those the afferent pathways. So the pathways coming from the heart to the brain are really, there's about 80% of the fibers are going to the brain, only 20% from the heart to the brain. And so now we have some data, recent data now, that shows that when you do this on a regular basis, training, you're affecting a lot of networks in the brain. So these are fMRI resting state networks in the brain, especially for emotional regulation. So the network that's the most affected is the amygdala to the left prefrontal cortex network is enhanced tremendously by this practice compared to a placebo, which didn't change it much at all. So we know it has effects both on reflexes in the body, but also having pretty powerful effects on the brain. And so that's the basis of some of the treatments for things like gastrointestinal problems, and for chronic pain conditions like fibromyalgia, or especially chronic muscle pain. Chronic muscle pain, we think, has a peripheral component. We can talk about that separately if you want. But
so as far as the patient, again, we have possible clients listening, trying to learn about this. So as far as the client's concerned, they sit in, a lazy boy chair, and as far as the sensors that we put on them, so it's a breathing belt and a heart rate sensor on their fingers. So it's like a Velcro that goes around their finger. Is that right? So they get both of those. And then, do I understand this right? That you're looking for a synchrony between the heart rate and the breathing. That at some point they're not lined up, and then when they get into this sweet spot, then that's where a lot of the feedback comes in. The patient, the client is receiving feedback that these things are overlapping in the correct way that brings about the biggest health response. Is that correct?
Correct. So you would be seeing a kind of chaotic pattern of your breathing and heart rate kind of going together a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Then when you go into effortless diaphragmatic slow breathing at your pace, let's say it's six breaths a minute, that'd be like 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. Suddenly you'll see both the respiration and the heart rate going together, as you said, in synchrony. For the kids, we say, make the dolphins swim together.
Yeah.
And so they're seeing these big, slow, beautiful waves going up and down with much greater distance between the valleys and the peaks. And when that happens, they will feel relaxed, because it starts to powerfully affect the brain and lowers anxiety. It lowers pain threshold. It raises pain thresholds. It turns off the sympathetic nervous system, an important part. So you start to see if you also have their finger temperature being monitored, you start to see your hands warming, because once you open up blood vessels, blood flows into your fingertips and they get warmer. So you see, and this sweat palming goes down. See everything going in the right direction in this beautiful synchrony of waves. You can't breathe that way all the time. That's not healthy or normal. But if you can do that 10 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes a day, it seems to strengthen reflexes throughout the body so that you're always getting the benefits of that for 24 to 48 hours. And yeah.
No, I'm sorry. Of all the equipment that we have, and we have, you know, a lot of the Thatcher databases, and we had our QEEG, and we're taking brain scans, and we have all sorts of methods of giving neurofeedback and all the biofeedback equipment. Of all of the stuff that we have, HRV is my personal favorite. If I need a little break in the afternoon, if I'm kind of overwhelmed, or right now I'm training a puppy, so I'm sleep deprived. But in the afternoon, if I do the HRV for 20 minutes, talk about a power nap. I mean, I wake up like I've had a good night rest, and you know, if I just want a little time out and go do that, it regenerated pretty quickly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Also, for the neurofeedback, following the Thompsons, Michael and Linda Thompson, we always start HRV by training before we do, especially for ADD, we start it before we do neurofeedback. It seems like there's that anxiety component in many of the kids with ADD, ADHD that calms down and makes it a little bit more greater potential. It's not enough training for ADD and ADHD, but it seems to be a really good entry level thing to start with. So we kind of do a few weeks of HRV training first and get the kid into a kind of nice, calm, relaxed state before they have to kind of learn to change their brain waves.
Yeah, it's great for everybody. Yeah, you know, if they're coming in, squeezing the appointment in during the day, or rushing in from the traffic or the parking lot, whatever, and to get them to do that for a few minutes. That's a good question. Do you have a set amount of minutes that is useful? I know we have kids and adults, they probably have different tolerance, but
well, we started off with 20 minutes a day, and we realized that many people won't do 20 minutes a day. So we still say, if you can, that's great. Some people will. But it looks like, and we don't really have good data on this, but it looks like 10 minutes a day is adequate. Some of the kids split it up into 5 and 5. With the music, they can do it like before COVID anyway, they could do it on the school bus or in the car going to school. And some kids seem to get enough benefit out of 2 5-minute things a day. If they have serious symptoms, we really try and stress 10 minutes a day at least. And it just depends on the disorder the kid has, but that seems to be, our clinical intuition is that seems to be enough if they do it most days of the week.
And, you know, you brought up this improved connection between the amygdala and the left prefrontal cortex. So are you seeing usefulness with this in depression and PTSD? Because those are the two things that kind of popped in my head when you said that. Yeah,
depression, anxiety, PTSD. So we have lots of small studies on depression where we see really nice changes in depression. Either by itself, but especially when it's combined with some other talk therapy, CBT or ACT. There's a really nice meta-analysis on anxiety with or without combinations of other therapies that show a really nice change in lowering of anxiety with the technique. For PTSD, we have limited data, but some data that when it's added to other therapies for PTSD, like prolonged exposure or cognitive processing therapy, that just kind of priming the autonomic nervous system makes those exposure therapies, or EMDR, makes those exposure therapies much more effective, probably about 25% more effective. And our experience is that, again, there's only a little data on this, is that it really cuts dropouts down. If anyone out there is familiar with these therapies are very difficult for patients with trauma because you have to relive some of the trauma to get better. And so that it's one of the hardest things anybody has to go through. I have a former student who was a military medic, and he's been through all kinds of things in his life. He said the hardest thing, he went over to Iraq and saw such horrible things in the medical set that he got PTSD, classic PTSD. And so he knew he had to go through this therapy. He said it was the hardest thing he ever had to do in his life.
Wow.
But using the HRV biofeedback kind of gives you a safety net so that when you're really feeling like these thoughts are going to really drive you up the wall, you can quickly switch into the slow breathing, calm yourself down, and then go back to being exposed again to the disturbing thoughts. So that's the way we do it. And when we did that, we saw dropout rates really, really go down a lot. Like instead of 60% dropout rates the VA has, we were getting 4% dropout rates. Really,
They're not afraid to come in and relive those things.
right. Plus the initial, as you said for yourself, the initial experience is very pleasant. So they know they're going to come in and get a pleasant experience first, and then they can get ready to do the hard work.
On the educational end, and I'm thinking CSPP. And by the way, I went to CSPP Alameda, and
Oh, no
there wasn't any HRV in the 90s for sure.
No.
How is this integrated into the curriculum? How are folks able to access this through their grad school training?
Well, in our campus, we have a health emphasis in the clinical PhD program.
Okay.
Which means that, as you know, that pre-doctoral training is not specialty training, it's generic clinical training. But we're allowed to have a kind of minor specialty within it. So in our campus, we have kind of a HRV health psychology lab. So students who come who want to study this are in my lab, and then we have a clinic on campus where we actually do the clinical training. On a sliding fee scale clinic. So they get to have both the didactic and the clinical training on our campus. I don't think there's very many other places where you can get that. Just the San Diego campus has that. The LA campus has health psychology, but more generic health psychology, not much in terms of biofeedback. So we have a fairly unique program that way. And so,
Sure.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. When we have guests on, I know Laura seems to be the one to ask, but it's kind of, hey, how do we get people to understand this, to be trained in it and be interested in all that? And so there are some programs, and we're finding more and more as we do this podcast every week, right? There's a couple of them out there now. There's a few out there. So it certainly is encouraging to know that it's being taught, right?
Yeah. And Steve, the Stens programs that Steve runs are really excellent too. I've been offered to work for other people, but I think they do it so responsibly. Their main trainers are really terrific, very good teachers, very gentle teachers. It's hard stuff for people.
For sure.
And I really enjoy those 2-day courses I do for him because he supplies enough equipment we usually in your area, we usually do it in St. Charles. So he has a big hotel room in St. Charles, and we have enough equipment for every 2 participants to be on a Nexus. And the training is so much better when you can do it that way. So I can do the whole didactic thing for the morning and put people on machines in the afternoon, realize they hardly understood any of it. And then we go through the whole protocol in the afternoon on the machine, and suddenly it starts to dawn on how this works, and they can see clinically how it works. And we can go back with questions. And so I really feel like, other than my own students, of course, where I can do this, other training programs that just talk at people for a day or two you can't really cement these principles in. So,
Sure.
So I really think they've done a great job with it. And hopefully we can get back to live training again pretty soon. I can get back to St. Charles.
We had John Anderson on last week.
Yeah.
And everybody, all 3 co-hosts here have been through at least one of John's classes. And
Right.
Personally, I don't know if I feel like I graduated, but I certainly was exposed to a hell of a lot of information that let me know I need to probably keep up with this for sure.
Yeah, so John and Tony Hughes are just really, really good teachers, right? Very gentle, calm teachers. And so I really appreciate it. I always recommend them. So Steve's not paying me anything to say that.
So to piggyback off that same question, what do you think gets in the way of having this out there more or more popular? Certainly that's our goal here, is to, make these things more accessible, try to, break things down into, more common language, and to educate people and have the podcasts and kind of stretch this idea and put it out there. But do you have an opinion on kind of why it's not, it's a great thing. I mean, that's what I just said is, yeah, boy, I feel like $1 million after doing it. But I seem to spend a lot of time educating people, almost trying to sell it or coax them in, hey, give this a try, because they just have never heard of it. What do you think gets in the way of having this more popular?
Well, a number of things. So one thing is there's so many complementary treatments out there that have no empirical basis at all, and people aren't good at telling the difference between what's snake oil and what's real. The other thing is that medical school training is just very slowly coming along in terms of training MDs. The medical model we have is diagnose and treat. So you do a scan, you do a test, you find out what's wrong, you treat it with medicine or a surgery or some other therapy. And it's so complicated that MDs just fall into that pathway. So the kinds of disorders that we treat, you can't do that with. They're difficult there's no good diagnostic test that they believe in. So that's one problem. The exception to that are pediatric gastroenterologists. They totally get it. So that we get every referral from our children's hospital for kids with functional disorders. There's with no resistance. But like cardiologists, you'd think they would get it. They kind of know about HRV, but they don't really get it. Some GPs do, but the family medicine docs are more friendly to it than other docs. But so without a doctor referring somebody, the first thing they do is go to the doctor for these kinds of problems. And without a doctor, that's a problem. And it's a little bit hard to understand. And it's not a single pill that makes you better. You have to practice on a regular basis. So for biofeedback, it's daily practice. For neurofeedback, it's a lot of sessions. And that's a barrier. There's no doubt about it. When someone looks at that and say, I'm going to have to do 20 to 30 sessions of this to make the difference, that is a big barrier. For ours, we only need 4 or 5 sessions, but if the person doesn't keep practicing, the benefits don't really last very long. So those are both things that in our culture, people want quick fixes. They don't want lifestyle change. They don't want things that we're talking about.
So to clear up what you said, so it could, and I dislike when I get these kind of questions. Well, how many sessions and when will I be better? And to your point is, yeah, they're looking for a fix. And if I take this pill, when will I immediately be better? So after the average probably of 20 to 30 sessions, are these symptoms reversed? I mean, are they done, so to speak? What are we telling people?
Yeah, it depends on the symptoms. So like for the adolescents with abdominal pain, they're often symptom free in 3 or 4 weeks if they're practicing. Mm-hmm. So we only need 4 or 5 sessions usually of actual, if we're only doing the biofeedback. We usually combine the biofeedback with talk therapies, a mindfulness type therapy, for where problems are a little bit more than just the autonomic regulation. It's a nice lead into that, and people kind of often want to do that. But if they don't, oftentimes they're better quickly. If they keep practicing, we do follow-ups, and they keep practicing, they do well for this one. So and it varies. So we definitely see some people who can't master this right away. I'm sure you've seen it too. They can't breathe with a diaphragm, for instance. So we have to do a lot of training just to teach them to breathe with their diaphragm. And then once they master that, they have a hard time with the HRV. There's a few of those. They may take, 5, 10, 12 sessions to master it. But mostly people master it pretty quickly. And then if they're practicing, that gets the first component of the treatment done. Let's say in addition to that, these are adolescents, their parents are going through a divorce, they're in a big junior high that's very stressful. Those adolescents tend to be anxious kids. So then we will just kind of meld that into mindfulness-based talk therapy called ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, which we find to be very effective. We have a lot of kid-oriented things, but also for adults and lots of young adults as well.
Are you finding in California that insurance is covering this or no?
It just depends. It depends on how good your biller is, how good the person you have is for billing. For me, I've given up trying to bill it as biofeedback. I'm a licensed psychologist, so I just bill it as psychotherapy since I'm in the room the whole time talking to them. And so I get paid in the usual psychotherapy rates. And that's true for the panels. For my former students who are in panels have found, with a few exceptions, TRICARE, the military will pay under some biofeedback codes. Aetna has a code for it, but it's just like pulling teeth to get them to pay. So for people who are not licensed social workers and psychologists, it's a battle to get it paid. If you're in a group with a really good billing person, they usually can get paid. But yeah, I don't want to sugarcoat it. It's definitely a challenge.
So for the moms and dads out there, I know you psychologists hate getting pinned down, but I'm going to try.
We don't
For
hate
the
Pete.
kid,
You don't hate.
no. For the kids, 3 or 4 weeks, they can go through the training process and they will get quote unquote better. The anxiety, what are the other diagnoses that can help out in 3 to 4 weeks to sum it up?
Well, so the most common ones we get with the young people are anxiety, gastrointestinal symptoms, some kinds of chronic pain. So sometimes it's muscle pain. That one resolves pretty quickly. We usually combine that with some kind of physical modality like acupressure, acupuncture, or physical therapy. Fibromyalgia takes a lot longer. Although it's easier to treat in kids. Fibromyalgia is a central pain amplification syndrome. And there's definitely an autonomic component, but it's much more than that. So for fibromyalgia, I would temper my predictions for that one.
Right.
Things that are autonomically mediated like POTS, like postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, where people get dizzy or lightheaded, that usually responds pretty well, especially if we do have some testing we can do in the beginning, show what state their autonomic nervous system is in. So it's like having a bad thermostat, right? If you have a bad thermostat, it gets cold before the heat comes on, and it's the same for your blood pressure. So it turns out that this training strengthens that thermostat for blood pressure. So we do get good results with people with, some people, there's a number of causes for that, but for some people with POTS, dysautonomia, it's often diagnosed as. So those are and depression, anxiety, of course, as we said before,
right.
Those are the primary ones we see. We do get an occasional, like sometimes we get kids with Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. We clearly can't cure that,
Right.
but helping them with stress seems to be a benefit for people with those disorders. Those are not stress-related disorders per se, but they create a lot of stress.
Right.
So we get reports back that people feel a lot calmer about being able to manage their chronic diseases like that.
So for 3 to 4 weeks, doctor, is that like 2 sessions a week to train them? Obviously, they have to do it at home on their own. I'm just trying to, how many sessions would it take in those 3 to 4
usually
weeks?
once a week. We usually figure 5 or 6 sessions once a week, but The later sessions, we usually spread out to 2 weeks because we want them to practice more in between. If they're practicing, now we're kind of experimenting with home devices that will send us their data on the practice. So now we're getting cheaper and cheaper devices. There's one from China called the Kyto, Kyto. It's a little, right now it's hard to get, but it's an ear clip device that's about $35. So the parents usually are willing to spend that money, and then you can go to one of these apps that will send the data to us, and we can analyze the data. We can see how the practice is going then.
Okay.
Once we see those practice there, that the person is practicing effectively on a pretty regular basis from that data, we usually see really good results from those people. People that don't practice, we often don't see great results with.
So we can tell mom and dad 3 to 4 weeks, 5 to 6 sessions, $1,200, and you're gonna have a better quality of life.
Yeah, not even that. Most sessions would be probably about $140.
Yeah.
So for the,
I mean,
6
worst
sessions.
case, I mean, 1,200 and your kid can have a better life.
Oh yeah,
even
yeah.
if
Especially, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, we in my workshop, I finish up the workshop with letters from former patients telling us to our clinicians. One of them was named Megan. So it was this a third grader dressed in Magnificent Megan, and it's the cutest letter you've ever seen about how her stomach aches went away and she could never be more thankful and loves her forever. We see a lot of those, and we've been doing it long enough now, so I get to see these kids. It started in 3rd grade, now they're finishing college, and they tell us they're still using the technique when they need it.
Priceless.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I had a question. It's definitely a left turn or right turn or something, and it's self-indulgent, just to be transparent. But can you, in a few words or sentences, talk about the enteric nervous system and how that fits in here? I don't hear it talked about much, and to be honest, it's a little confusing to me. But I know it's in the gut, and so it has to be involved with what we're talking about somehow, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's actually a nice book out called The Second Brain about the enteric nervous system. The enteric nervous system is a series of neurons in the gut, all through the gut, from the esophagus down to the lower intestine, that regulate everything that the gut does, taking fluid out, moving food processes along, taking the nutrients out. Everything is controlled by the enteric nervous system. It has 10 to the 9th neurons, 10 with 9 zeros after it, neurons. It's a massive, almost a brain in and of itself. It has a lot of internal regulation, but it's externally regulated by the parasympathetic nervous system.
Okay.
So when this parasympathetic nervous system is on, doing its thing, it's the enteric nervous system is doing what it's supposed to do to take the right amount of fluid out of the food stuff, move it along properly, expel it without pain, without discomfort. When it's not working properly, then you have possible symptoms from the esophagus to the stomach, to the small intestine, to the large intestine, where there can be pain thresholds can be greatly reduced if that system's not working. So in most of the patients with abdominal pain comes from excessive stretching of the gut. There's no pain sensors in the gut for cutting. There's the only 2 that there are is for extreme acidity or for stretching. So if you've ever just had like a gas bubble and you had like a little twingy pain in your gut, that's because those nerves are very clearly detecting something stretching the gut too much, sending back information to the brain. And in the patients with these problems, that sensitivity to that stretch is greatly amplified. So what you and I might feel like as a twinge, they feel like a crippling abdominal pain. And that's because over time, the parasympathetic system isn't regulating the enteric nervous system properly. So if we can restore that, oftentimes very quickly we can restore it, sometimes it takes longer, then those sensations are no longer pain. they just become normal gut sensations like we all get.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody got anything else? Dr. Laura?
Well, no, I'm just glad we're having this. I was just thinking, nice conversation. I'm glad we have access to you and be able to, ask these kinds of questions to clarify it. And again, I do feel like I'm spending a lot of time educating, which is the right thing. And it's not a complaint as much as, if it became a little more, popularized, then I think that's where we get a lot of our referrals, by the way, is through word of mouth, that people say, hey, I had a great experience, and they tell their neighbor, and we get a lot of those kind of referrals. So I guess my comment is just more appreciative, grateful that you came in and took the time to speak with us. And it's nice, you're a psychology professor, distinguished, and lends credibility. Like you said, there's plenty of people who hang their shingles out there, but it's nice that, we have professionals who are clinically trained and, have the knowledge base, for the biological, things, and helps educate the clients and the listeners that we have. So thank you for coming here and talking with us.
Okay.
Doctor, what's the best way for our listeners to check out your services? Like, what was that webpage you're talking about for HRV?
Yeah, there's two things. You want me to put it in the chat, or you want me to just say it?
Go ahead. I mean, we'll put it up on the website later. But
There's two things. There's two that we can do. One is our website. That's just for our little sliding fee clinic in San Diego at our school.
Sure.
But it has the free music for pacing.
Got it.
So that's, especially for kids, that seems to be useful. Website.com/site. I think I got that right. Whoop, no, I didn't. Okay, so that's the website. One of my students also made a little 12-minute video on HRV, which you can get on Google by just Googling Stern. His name was Mark Stern. Stern.
It was.
Another Stern, of course.
Oh, God.
Yes, not Steve Stern. This is Mark
Okay.
Stern. No relation.
Not Sturman?
Not Sturman, no.
Stens?
Stern, BSc, HRV. I think if you Google that,
Okay.
you get sort of a little spiel like, is HRV right for you, kind of thing.
Got it.
And it's a nice, he put together a nice little explanation, kind of like I was talking about.
All right. RGEVIRTZ WIX site
Whoops, there's a
com.
com. Yeah, there's a com in there, sorry. .com.
.com. Got it. My site.
.com.
Okay. We'll edit that out in post. Not a problem.
Yeah.
Dr. Gevirtz. What about the Stens website? You're on the Stens website. If somebody wants to take the course, I know we got COVID. How many? If we don't have COVID, how many times a year do you offer the course?
Oh, it just depends what Steve wants me to do. Usually once or twice. I just did it. I just did an online version for him. Should be coming out soon. Which is, me talking to a computer for 2 days.
Right.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, I would much rather have people there, but I put together as best I could all the materials, and that you can. I don't know where he is with finishing the editing of that, but I finished my part of it. That should be coming out.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Gevirtz. Did I say that right at the end of the show? Finally, Gevirtz.
Gevirtz.
Jeez, Louise. I need
That's
some
all right.
neuro. I might have to get some.
We're
HRV
really used
too.
to it. Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
My brother's a lawyer right in your area, so
Oh, is he?
Might see. You remember that bureau case some years ago? That kid from New Trier that had a ritual killing.
Oh, yeah.
he defended him.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
So, and there's a whole book about it actually, about that says.
Oh, no
So
kidding.
he's over in Glenview. He's a criminal lawyer.
Okay. Well,
I thought
I'm going to use him in a pinch.
I thought you were going to say Pete's going to be hearing from him for slandering your name.
Yeah. No, he's
Take a
not a
note.
civil. I have to hire a civil lawyer to do that. He would
Take a
defend
number.
Pete. He would defend Pete from God knows what.
There's no defense for me. All right, guys. Thanks for coming on board.
Okay, guys,
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you, doctor.
have a good one.
All
You too.
righty.
Hey.
Dr. Laura can be found at jansons.com, jansons.com. Dr. Skip can be found at drskiprin.com. That's drskip, Do you have an idea for a topic or a guest? Please email me, Pete, at neuronoodle.com. Please give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Smash that like button on Facebook, Instagram, and follow us on Twitter. Cue the music.